Hey guys, hope you had a great weekend. Let's get back to it, okay? So, we're going to talk today about how all of the things that we've talked about so far actually are going to work in music. Specifically, kind of if you were going to write music. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today, okay? So, we've talked about beat and we've talked about note value a lot, and we know that they kind of go together, right? Well, note value and beat also kind of go together with measures and meter, okay? Now, first of all, measures. We organize beats by putting them into measures. So, specifically, measures are the bar lines that separate beats in music, okay? So, for example, if you look here at this example, you can see the first line, we have a little snippet from Old MacDonald. You can see there are these little lines right here. Now, these are bar lines that show us where our measures are, okay? These little lines that you see me drawing are not the measures. These are the bar lines that show us where our measures start and end, specifically, okay? So, for example, this from here to here is a measure, from here to here is a measure, and so on and so forth. If you see a bar line, that marks the beginning and or the end of that measure. Okay, so let's go back. The first beat in every measure is the strong beat. Okay, the first beat in every measure is the strong beat. So if the first beat in every measure is strong, that means that just kind of by default, all the other beats in that measure are weak. Okay, so back to our example here. Let's draw our measures back in. Okay, oops, skipped one. There we go. All right, perfect. So on that first example, you can see we have our first beat is going to be strong, right? Always. So that's strong. Now, this next beat is going to be weak, weak, weak. Now, this next one, we got to stop and think about, okay? Is it going to be strong or weak? Well, it's the first beat of a new measure, okay? And the first beat of every measure is going to be strong. And again, weak, weak, and weak beats also include rests, okay? So that first line, it's going to sound like this. Strong, weak, 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 strong, weak, weak, weak. Okay? Now, take a look at this. If you count that, strong, weak, weak, weak is 1, 2, 3, 4 beats. All right, if you take a look at over here, these little numbers, you can see on that top number is a number 4. So we have 4 beats in each measure, and we happen to have a number 4 over there. Keep that in mind. If you look down here at the bottom, in the middle, we're going to have our first beat is always going to be strong, strong, weak, weak. So you can see the measures are a little bit shorter. There's one less beat here. Strong, and we know that a half note is worth 2 beats, so that's going to be weak, imaginary in there. And weak, strong, weak, weak, strong. Remember, weak beats count for rests too. Weak, weak. Now, how many beats do you see per measure there? Strong, weak, weak is 1, 2, 3 beats. And lo and behold, what do you see here? Keep that in mind for here in a second, okay? Then down here, if we follow the same pattern we're following here, if this is a 2, how many beats do you think we're going to have in each measure? If here we have 4 beats and we have a 4 on top, and here we have 3 beats and a 3 on top, then here you can probably guess if we've got a 2, there are just going to be 2 beats per measure. Okay, so we have strong and weak. Then we start a new measure, strong, weak. New measure, strong, weak, strong, weak. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Now, let's move on. Oh, I wanted to show you. Here's an example of what it kind of really looks like in music. You can see these bar lines go all the way down through what we call the grand staff. Okay. Well, sort of. It's not really a grand staff. But anyway, so just wanted to give you an example of what it really looked like in actual music, not just Old MacDonald Had a Farm. So anyway, moving on to meter. Now, how many beats we have in a measure determines the meter. Just like back a second ago on Old MacDonald Had a Farm, we had 4 beats in every measure, and you could see that there was a little number 4. So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about, okay? When you're looking for meter in music, it's going to look something like this. Almost kind of like a fraction. There will be a number on top and a number on bottom. Okay, and each one of those numbers tells us a different thing. Okay, that bottom number is what we want to go to first. The bottom number tells us what kind of notes our meter is using. Okay, and I'll explain that in a second. The top number tells us how many of those notes we're going to have in a measure. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and tell you that if we have a 4 on the bottom, if we have a number 4 on the bottom, that means that we're dealing with quarter notes. Okay, and then we have a 3, that means we're going to have three quarter notes per measure. Okay, 3 quarter notes per measure. All right, so let's look at how we're going to know what the number on the bottom is meaning. Okay, so if you look at this chart, and by the way, for your homework, you're going to be able to use this kind of chart. I'm going to attach it to any homework that we're doing. Okay, if you look at that chart, you can see that a whole note is going to, if we're talking about whole notes, it's going to be a 1 on the bottom. So for example, let's say that our meter was 2, 1. Okay, that would mean that we're dealing with whole notes, okay, and that would mean that we have 2 whole notes per measure. Okay, and similarly, if you see a 2, that means we're talking about half notes. So let's say that our meter is 3, 2. Remember, the 2 tells us that we're dealing with half notes, and the 3 means that we will have 3 half notes per measure. Moving on, same thing. If we see a 4 on the bottom, that means that we're dealing with quarter notes. And the 4 on the top tells us that we're having 4 quarter notes in every measure. And then exactly the same, if we just keep on going, if we have an 8 on the bottom, that means that we're dealing with eighth notes. And the 6 means that we'll have 6 eighth notes per measure. Now, the meter does not limit what notes you are allowed to use. I know that's a little confusing, but if, for example, if our meter was 3, 2, that does not mean that the only notes that you are allowed to use are 3 half notes per measure. Okay, so let me explain. Let's talk about 3, 2 again. Okay, remember that the 2 tells us that we're dealing with half notes. Okay, so we have 3 half notes per measure. In other words, it's going to look, our example measure would look like this. Okay, now how many beats is a half note worth? We know from our note value lesson that half notes are worth 2 beats. Okay? Half notes are worth 2 beats. Now, if you were to add up the note value there of 3 half notes, 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals what? 6. So that means that if we were going to write music in 3/2, we can have no more than 6 beats per measure. But we can use any notes we want to fill it as long as we have 6 beats, no more, no less. Okay? So remember, we're trying to fill in these measures to equal 6 beats. What if I did a whole note and a half note? How many beats is a whole note? 4. How many beats is a whole note? 4. How many beats is a half note? 2. 4 plus 2 equals 6. So does that measure work? Yes, it does. Now, what if I had a quarter note and a half rest and a half note and another quarter note? Let's do the math there. How many beats is a quarter note? 1. How many beats is a half rest? Remember, a half rest sounds like or looks like a hat. So we have 2. We know that a half note is also worth 2. And same thing, a quarter note is 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. Plus 2 is 5. Plus 1 equals 6. So does that measure work? Yes, it does. Now, what if I just had 2 half notes and 1 quarter note? Both of these half notes are each going to be worth 2 beats, right? And that quarter note is worth 1. So 2 plus 2 plus 1 is equal to 5. Does that work? It does not. Remember, it cannot be less than or greater than 6. So if we added a quarter rest here, then does it work? 2 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1 equals 6. Now that works. Okay? Just in case that doesn't make sense, let's do that again, because here's the deal. Let's be real. That is a lot of steps. Okay? So let's do another one. Let's do 2, 4. Actually, no, I changed my mind. Let's do 4, 4, just so we have a little bit more wiggle room to work with. Okay? Remember, the 4 on the bottom means that we're dealing with quarter notes. Now, let me say this. This chart is confusing, right? Because note value and meter are not the same, right? We know that a quarter note is actually only worth 1 beat. But if you see a 4 on the bottom, that means we're talking about quarter notes, right? You would think that if you saw a 4 on the bottom, we're talking about whole notes, but that's actually not the case. Okay, if you see a 4 on the bottom, we're talking about quarter notes when we're talking about meter. Okay, so 4 on the bottom means that we're dealing with a quarter note, right? And this 4 on top just carries over. So we know that we're dealing with 4 quarter notes per measure. Okay, now let's do our little example measure. And we're going to draw 4 quarter notes in. Now remember, this does not mean we are limited to only having 4 quarter notes in our music, right? This means that we just have to stay within the guide or the limits that we're given, okay? So each of these quarter notes we know is going to be worth 1 beat. So how many beats can we have total? 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 4. So we can have 4 beats total. So let's do a couple examples. What if I just did 1 whole note? How many beats is 1 whole note? 4. Is that equal to 4? Yes. What if I did a half note and a quarter note? How many beats is that? Well, we know that a half note is worth 2 beats, plus a quarter note is how much? 3. Is 3 enough? No, so we need to add something else in there. What if I add 2 eighth notes? How much is an eighth note worth? Remember, this eighth note is worth half, and this eighth note is worth half. 2 plus 1 is 3, plus a half is 3.5, plus another half is 4. Does that work? Yes, now it does. What if I had a half rest, and 2 quarter notes? How many beats is that half rest? 2. How many beats are each of these quarter notes going to be? 1 and 1. 2 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4. Does that work? Yes. Hopefully you're kind of getting the idea here, okay? So let's move on to putting measures into music, okay? As you can see, we've got a little chunk of music here, but there are no bar lines to show us where our measures are there? Okay, so that means we have to decode that time signature or the meter. We have to decode that, and then we have to go add up the note value and write the bar lines in ourselves. Okay, so here you can see we have 3, 4. Let's copy that up here. 3, 4. Now, we remember from our chart that a 4 shows us that we're dealing with quarter notes. So we're going to put a quarter note here on the bottom, and we're going to carry that 3 over, so we know that we are dealing with 3 quarter notes per measure. Okay? If we have 3 quarter notes per measure, we know that 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3. So we can have 3 beats total. Now here on this example, we have to figure out where to put those bar lines. Now we know that we have to put them after we see 3 beats. So first things first, let's just go and label every single one of these notes with their note value so that it'll make it a little bit easier to do our addition. Okay, so first we have some eighth notes. Each one of those eighth notes is going to be worth half of a beat. Quarter note is 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Then we have some more eighth notes. Half, 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 half. 1. Here we have a half note. We remember half notes are worth 2. And last but not least, we have a quarter note worth 1 beat. Okay, so let's add, starting at the very beginning, let's add up until we get to 3 beats. Half plus half is 1, plus another 1 is 2, plus another 1 is 3. So if we put our bar line here and we add up all of these, this is equal to 3. So does that work? Yes. Next up, this one should be easy. What do we have here? 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. So that can be a measure. Now here you can see it gets a little tiny bit more complicated. 1 half plus 1 half is 1. Plus another half is 1.5. Then we have another half, which is 2. Plus 2 plus 1 is 3. So we put a bar line. And then we know that we're correct because our very last measure from here to here is 2 plus 1, which equals 3. Okay? So it's not super, super complicated, right? But it is a lot of steps that we have to follow. It's a lot of steps. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you don't, if you wrote down notes with this, which would be amazing and very helpful, If you wrote down notes, make sure you don't lose those notes, or you don't forget to come and check this video and watch it a couple times to make sure that you've got it figured out, okay? I don't want you to do poorly on an assignment or something just because you didn't quite understand. So on that note, if you have any questions, please send me a message on Schoology or email me, okay? I don't ever want somebody to be confused when it's just because they didn't reach out and so I could help them, okay? Next up, this one should be a little bit easier because we're only dealing with 2 4. Remember from our chart that a 4 is showing us that we're dealing with quarter notes. So we're going to have a quarter note on the bottom. We move that 2 over. That means we are dealing with 2 quarter notes per measure. And we already know that quarter notes are worth 1 beat, so we're dealing with 2 beats total. So our limit is 2 beats, okay? So let's go through and label our note value again, okay? We have a quarter note, which is 1, a quarter rest this time, which is worth 1, 1, 1. We have eighth notes, which are worth half and half, 1, 1, 1. Okay, now, like I said, this should be pretty easy because now we just have to add up to 2. 1 plus 1 is 2, so we're going to put a measure right there. 1 plus 1 is 2, so we're going to put a measure right there. 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1, plus another 1 is 2. And then 1 plus 1 equals 2. Okay, clear as mud? Next thing. Last example. This one's going to be a little bit trickier because we're just dealing with more notes here. Okay, so if you look, we have 4, 4. I'm not going to go back to the chart because this is our 3rd time doing this. We know that a 4 on the bottom means we're dealing with quarter notes. So we move that over, 4 quarter notes per measure. So our example is going to look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. We know that quarter notes are worth 1 beat. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4. So our minimum and our maximum is 4. Our measures have to, if you add up the note value in our measures, it has to be equal to 4. It can't be less than, it can't be greater than, it has to be 4. Okay, so let's go through and label all of our note values and then we'll be done. Okay, so this quarter note is worth 1 beat. Eighth notes are half and half, 1, 1, 1, 1. A half note is worth 2 beats. 1, half, 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 half. We keep going. Half, half. Quarter note is 1, 1. Half note is 2. Okay, so now that we got that all done, if you take a look, we're remembering that we're looking for a minimum and maximum of 4 beats. Okay, we start here. 1 plus half is 1.5, plus half is 2, plus 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. So that's it. Then we're going to move on to 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 2 is 4. 1 plus a half is 2, plus a half is 2.5, plus a half is 3, plus half is 3.5, plus half is 4. That one was really messy and really confusing. Okay, then last but not least, we know that we did it correctly because we have 1 plus our last notes. If we add them together, if we add our last notes together, we have 1 plus 1 plus 2, which equals 4. Okay, I know that is super confusing. So I'm going to recommend that you come back and watch this video multiple times, okay? I will probably also make another video this week just to make sure that it's extra clear, okay? So if you have any questions, please make sure you email me. I would love to schedule a Zoom meeting or something with you so that we could get together and answer any questions that you have. Okay? Or send me a message on Schoology if it's just a quick question, okay? And remember, the most important thing is to be kind. So make sure that today when you're, whoever you see, make sure that you're kind to them and that you're making their day better, okay? Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for tuning in. Bye, guys.